If I asked you what the crux of Christianity is, what would you say? What is it that all of Christianity hinges on? What makes Christianity true and all other religions or worldviews fall short? What would your answer be? Perhaps you've never really thought about it. Maybe you were raised a Christian and never really questioned what your family taught you. Undoubtedly, others of you have had some experience and felt something very profound, but do any of those scenarios prove something to be true? But Willie, you weren't there. I felt the Spirit of God moving on that very special day. I'm sure you did feel something. Surely my parents wouldn't lie to me. I'm willing to bet they wholeheartedly believed what they taught you as well. My point is, everyone has some belief they're bringing to the table, but that doesn't make them all equally valid. In the same way you believe you had an encounter with God at that church service, someone else believes they encountered the female deity on a nature walk. You trusting your parents' influence in a higher power may be well-intentioned, but they probably also informed you that when you lost your incisor, you would receive compensation from the sprite of a winged variety. So if we can't simply rely on believing what we were taught or our own personal experience, how do we know Christianity is true? If you've never looked into evidence for the resurrection, I'm going to give you a brief primer. However, let me preface this by encouraging you to do your own research. Some of the biggest names in defense of the resurrection include N.T. Wright, Mike Licona, and Gary Habermas. I could list others, but those three are typically the most prominent. Now, I will be borrowing from Habermas and Licona's work, more popularly known as the minimal facts approach, and putting my own little spin on it. So I hope you find this helpful. There are many more useful arguments for the resurrection, but for time's sake, we're going to start with this one. For starters, here's what we know. And this is something that all scholars accept, including the critical ones. Jesus' disciples all believed that Jesus had died, rose again, and appeared to them. Now that doesn't mean that critical scholars believe he did rise from death and appear to the apostles, but they acknowledge that the disciples genuinely believed that he did. How do we know this? Well, there are three key pieces of evidence. One is they were claiming it. The second is oral tradition. And then we have the written reports. And that's all we need to justify that they were claiming it. With all this as a foundation, we don't even need to say they believed it. We could just agree they were claiming it. Now, if you happen to be listening to this and not watching the video, there were texts displayed, so please go back and look at them. But now we have one of two options. He either rose from the dead or he did not rise from the dead. Let's start with the latter option. Let's argue that he didn't actually rise from the dead based on this evidence. That means the disciples claimed he did, but he actually didn't. And what explanations could we have for this? Could they have lied? If they were lying about it, the tradition and records like Luke, Tertullian, John, Origen, Polycarp, Ignatius, Clement of Rome, all claiming the apostles, being eyewitnesses to seeing him alive after death, were willing to suffer and die for such a belief. What this shows is that they were sincere in what they believed. People are not willing to suffer for something that they believe is a lie. What other explanations could we have then? Well, if they claimed he rose and he didn't, could they have hallucinated? This is an interesting hypothesis, but we have a number of problems with it, literally. The amount of recipients of such a hallucination is an extreme issue. If you do research on hallucinations, the ones most likely to be impacted are senior adults who are grieving the loss of a loved one like a spouse. And only 7% of those individuals are likely to experience a visual hallucination. And here's the bigger issue. Jesus appeared to hundreds of people at one point. He appeared to the 12. The research seems to imply that hallucinations are private occurrences in the mind of an individual. And Mike Licona likens this to that of a dream. I can't wake up my wife and say, babe, I was having this amazing dream where we were at Universal Studios. Like, come join me in this dream for a free vacation. So if Jesus appeared to a group, it likely wasn't a hallucination. Now, another issue with the hallucination theory is the Apostle Paul. As I've already demonstrated, hallucinations seem to occur with the elderly who are grieving the loss of a loved one. Let's dispel the elderly notion for just a moment and accommodate all of those following Jesus. Problem is, Paul wasn't one of them. He was vehemently against Christians and seeking to have them murdered. He'd be the last one you would expect to have an encounter with Jesus, yet that is precisely what he claims. If I'm to be as charitable to the skeptic as possible here, once ruling out lying and hallucination, we could just say that they were using him rising from death metaphorically. But again, Paul is the thorn in their side there. You see what I did there? Paul doesn't care about metaphor. Just see 1 Corinthians 15:17. So now that we've exhausted that branch, let's hop on the other side. They claimed he rose, so what are our options here? I would argue we have three options as well on this side. Either Jesus' resurrection is a legendary myth, he didn't actually die, or he did indeed rise bodily from death. Let's consider this to be legendary for a second. A tall tale, if you will, the likes of King Arthur or Robin Hood. Unfortunately for the skeptic, I find a number of dilemmas with this as well. The first being, none of the most reputable first century historians like Josephus, Tacitus, or other first century contemporaries of Christ, now we're talking biblical or extra-biblical, including the physician Luke, Roman officials, members of Jesus' own family, of whom we are aware, exempting the Jewish religious leadership who clearly had an agenda of their own, ever apparently disputed the New Testament accounts of Jesus' supernatural claims and feats, although such accounts were all being quite widely circulated during their lifetimes. It would have been all too easy for one of them to speak up and say, hey, he didn't do that, in order to discredit him and the apostles and their movement. Also, legends typically require a significant amount of time to develop and gain credibility. Yet just 20 or so years after Christ's death, the followers of Jesus had creeds and doctrine already developing based on his bodily resurrection. We don't see reports of the life of someone like Alexander the Great until centuries after his lifetime. And again, we come into the issue we had with claiming the disciples were lying. If it were a legend, would they be willing to die for it? And I think we've already adequately addressed that issue. Well, what if he didn't actually die? Now, when one understands the rigors of what crucifixion was, it is very difficult to imagine how anyone could survive this torturous execution. There's actually only one account in antiquity of someone surviving crucifixion, and it's in the Jewish War written by Josephus. 3 of Josephus' friends were crucified, and he asked a favor from a Roman friend in a high position to have them cared for. And after all the best medical care Rome had to offer at the time, 2 of them still died. So if Jesus somehow survived, he certainly didn't have access to such a treatment, making his chances of survival seemingly impossible. To further complicate matters, there is no evidence suggesting Jesus was removed alive, let alone receiving excellent medical care. And if you know anything about history, historians have to go with probability, not mere possibility, especially when the other possibility doesn't have a shred of evidence. Not to mention all the sources we have, both biblical and extra-biblical, that mention Jesus' actual dying, so the Gospels, Josephus, Tacitus. With no alternative evidence, we have to conclude Jesus was crucified and in the process, it killed him. So what option do we have left? Jesus' disciples claim that he rose, and he actually did. Faith might be blind for a great number of people, but Christianity is not a blind faith. I tried to prove my point last time. I may have become a Christian because of a series of experiences, but I remain a Christian because of the evidence. Christianity, in my opinion, has more evidence for it than any other belief system, and that most certainly includes atheism, from my perspective. Bottom line, if the resurrection happened, Christianity is true. It doesn't matter if you don't like it. I don't like that pickles exist. Doesn't make them not real. It doesn't matter if you have an issue with this Bible story or that one. Christianity doesn't fall or die on young earth creationist arguments, nor on your view of the end times being correct, whether or not there are 7 years of tribulation. Doesn't matter. The truth of Christianity isn't even dependent on the Bible being entirely accurate or true. I think we could make a case for the resurrection without it. Whoa, 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 Willie, slow your roll. Christianity without the Bible, that's just heresy. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying the Bible isn't important and or critical, nor am I saying we shouldn't be appealing to it. I'm just saying I don't think we need it to make a case that the resurrection happened. But let's talk more about the Bible next time. Given that we're just getting started, we could use your help. If you find all this content at all helpful or know someone who could benefit from it, please like, share, spread by word of mouth, all that fun stuff. And please comment below or link arguments for the resurrection that you're familiar with, or any issues that you might have with this one. That's perfectly fine. But until next time, stay close to God and close to others.